There are over 700 servants working for the royal family, but can they all be trusted?
Once indispensable personal servant.
Royal servants have become threats to their master when they start blabbing.
And blabbing can earn you a fortune.
He is going to be a very rich man after this book. Well, good, because he deserves it.
But not all servants can be bought.
Servants should keep their mouths shut.
Coming up tonight, we hear about the highs and lows of serving the royal family.
A plop of gravy went splop straight down the Queen Mother's cleavage.
And hear what life was like as Princess Di's personal chef.
She used to come down into the kitchen. She would burst through the doors and say, "You'll never believe what Fergie's just told me."
And why on earth do poorly paid servants work such long hours?
It's almost as if they're in the presence of something special, that it rubs off on them. And the reality is that's a massive buzz for these people.
The undercover journalist who blagged his way into Buckingham Palace will tell us the downside of being close to the royals.
I remember one of the more senior footmen said, "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," and he was greeted with a "F off."
And the journalist who helped Paul Burrell write his book sets the record straight.
The story that Paul grovelled at the princess's feet is utter nonsense.
Tonight, we'll go through palace doors to discover the intimate details of life as a royal servant. Behind the scenes, butlers lay out clothes, footmen carry early morning trays, and housemaids sweep carpets, lest royal ears are offended by vacuum cleaners. The best servant is the one that's neither seen nor heard.
They want you there, but they don't want you there. They want you there because you have to be there. They want you there because they can't manage without you there.
The Prince of Wales, he doesn't lift a thing. He gets up in the morning, his bathrobe is there waiting for him. He walks into the bathroom, the bath is drawn for him already. Well, even when he gets out of the bath, the towel is folded in a special way so that he just has to sit in it and wrap it around him. Then he goes into his dressing room. His clothes are all laid out for him. Even his socks, left and right, are in exactly the right spot.
There might be some function which involves a picnic where the Queen will say, "Well, we will all muck in." But of course, there's mucking in some directions and there's mucking in others. I mean, in actual fact, it's quite well known that the Duke of Edinburgh may well turn a sausage, but he won't wash the plate up as the sausage lands on.
Mucking in and turning sausages are the exception. The royal family demand the most professional servants in the world, the kind of servants who would rather die than make a mistake.
When I was serving the Queen Mother one evening, I went in with the gravy and the sauce. And as I went down, the gravy boat slid. So I grabbed it quickly, and a plop of gravy went splop straight down the Queen Mother's cleavage. And it was red hot gravy. And her beautiful blue eyes went cold. And she was badly burnt, and it was just seconds, and her face froze with the pain. And the steam coming up from her cleavage, she looked like Joan of Arc. And I felt as guilty, I felt dreadful. I said, "Your Majesty, I'm terribly sorry." And I meant it. And the Queen Mother said, "Well, I'm the one who's sorry," she said, "Paul." She said, "I actually nudged your elbow." She hadn't touched me at all. There was no physical contact. That was her gracious way of realising the agony I was in after putting her in extreme agony.
But it doesn't always work so well. Some of the Windsors can be a nightmare to serve.
You find yourself being treated badly by members of the royal family. Then you find that your loyalty has really not really been very well placed. And you start to want to try and reveal what it's really like.
And a servant out for revenge is a dangerous one.
They know too much. They are there, if you like, an invisible force. They're there witnessing and watching what goes on. And anything members of the royal family do is big news.
Royal secrets sell. For the right story, servants can earn a king's ransom. The most famous of these is ex-butler Paul Burrell, who published a book about his time with the Queen, Prince Charles and Princess Diana.
It's sold about 600,000 around the world. In Australia, America, Canada, Britain, Europe, even Japan and China now. In Ireland, we had one woman rushing up to just to grab his hand, kiss him and say you're a saint. One woman in Sydney flung her arms around him and wouldn't let go. She had to be prized away by security.
But to those servants who keep silent about their years of service, Paul Burrell personifies the worst kind of betrayal.
As a servant, Paul Burrell was great. I would love to meet up with Paul and say, why have you done this? Because you see, when one servant spills the beans, he's letting down all the other servants who wouldn't spill the beans. And to me, people who do that are lower than traitors and should be despised as such.
Whether he's a traitor or a celebrity millionaire, Paul Burrell has come a long way from the poor mining town he was born into. Like many royal servants, he wanted to escape from the world he was born into.
A letter came from the master at the palace to say there's a vacancy there for a dining room steward. So I went down to Buckingham Palace. Nobody knew where I was going, and I thought I haven't a cat in hell's chance of getting this job.
The first initial interview with the butler was okay. I felt I was on a level that I could understand. But then I moved up a ladder to be interviewed by a private secretary.
I've got this broad Lancashire accent, which is evident, and I imagined, like most people imagine, to be around the royals, one has to say off and loaf and both, or whatever. And I didn't say any of that.
He said, oh, is that the applicant at the other end of the room? Well, of course, I felt if the floor had opened up, I'd been gladly gone through the hole. Then he continued to say, well, have you taken this young man around the palace? And the butler replied, well, yes, I have. And what does he think about it? With that, the butler turns to me and says, what do you think about it? He didn't give me a chance to answer, turned to the secretary again and said, he says it's very nice.
So a month later, I was packing my bags from the council house I lived in to move into Buckingham Palace, the most prestigious address in the world.
My mother was absolutely elated. She couldn't wait to go and buy a bottle of sherry and ask all the neighbours in to have a glass of it because her son had suddenly got a job at a palace.
And going through the palace gates is like entering a different world.
They're just completely blown away by the glamour, the wealth, and the glossiness of the royal family. And they come down with a big, big dose of red carpet fever.
It was luxury I'd never ever seen in my life. These vast staterooms, the throne room, the state ballroom, and to be in the same house as the Queen of England and her family. It just seemed, you know, unreal.
It isn't just about living in luxury. What servants crave is face time.
It's when junior servants get to actually spend time one-to-one with members of the royal family. And the reality is that's a massive buzz for these people.
When I served lunch to the Queen for the very first time in my life, and she picked the menu up, she said, what have I got for lunch? And she's reading the menu, she had her spectacles on, and she put it back, and she said, she looked at me and gave me a beautiful smile. She said, I think the dogs get better fed.
It's almost as if they're in the presence of something special, that it rubs off on them and they get a real buzz out of it. They can go and talk about it to their friends and they feel very important. And even though they're paid very little amounts of money and they are living in quite menial quarters, this is exactly what they live for.
And if it's FaceTime you're after, no task is too menial, as long as you're in the royal presence.
It's often been said that Princess Margaret was very difficult. Of course, at a banquet, for instance, or a big social function, it meant you'd have to dance attendance on her all night long by possibly just standing to her left or right with an ashtray, so she didn't have to look to see where she flicked her ash, you know.
The problem for the royal family is that human ashtrays have ears.
The royal family living in this almost, not medieval, but Edwardian system where they've got servants wandering around the palace and listening and learning what's going on.
Once you are in the royal family's home, they are then at your mercy. And they then hope that their choice in choosing you to serve them and to look after them has been the right choice.
The royal family need to be sure that they employ the right people who apply for the right reasons, but they don't. When palace officials took on Ryan Parry as a footman, they couldn't have chosen anyone less suitable. He was the Mirror's undercover reporter intent on exposing breaches in palace security. They didn't even do the most basic checks.
It was literally a case of typing my name into a Google search engine, and the third item that comes up is Daily Mirror journalist exposes shocking security scandal at Wimbledon. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out that that's a basic check.
Ryan Parry was given as much access as a tried and trusted servant.
The first day it was literally a grand tour of the palace, which was absolutely amazing. You know, for an outsider going into the palace, I mean, I was literally shown every nook and cranny.
And he was perfectly placed to hear all the servants' gossip about the royals.
Well, as part of a footman's duty, you had to, first of all, take a calling tray into a royal's private bedroom. And on one occasion that I remember, one of the more senior footmen telling me, he took this tray into the Duke of York's bedroom, opened the curtain and said,
"Good morning, Your Royal Highness."
And he was greeted with a "F off."
As well as gossip about the royals, there was evidence of cost cutting. In the last 10 years, royal expenditure has been cut by over £50 million. And it's not just the Royal Yacht Britannia that's gone.
In my room at the palace, it was very basic. You know, there was a single bed, a wardrobe, a sink, and a chair and a set of drawers, and that was it. It was like a university hall to residence. So it wasn't the best kind of home to have.
And besides his unprincely take-home pay of £9,000 a year, there were other signs of cost-cutting too.
The Tupperware, yeah, of course. I mean, you know, that was probably one of the more famous things about the whole story. You know, that's what people picked up on.
Former servants believe that Ryan Parry planted the Tupperware on the Queen's table.
The Queen uses Tupperware when she goes out for picnic lunches. We would drive ahead in the Range Rovers with the baskets, with the flasks and the plastic plates, the plastic knife and forks, the throwaway disposable plastic cups you get on British Rail, and Tupperware things with the lettuce and tomatoes, etc. in. They are the only occasions the Queen uses her Tupperware for outdoor purposes. It's a common sense usage of Tupperware.
I literally had a 3-second pocket to take that picture. So to kind of find Tupperware from somewhere and fill it with porridge oats and stick it in front of the in the Queen's china plate, then I think that's ridiculous.
I had to laugh. It was quite funny, in a sense, but it was made really to make the Queen and members of family look pathetic.
Was it necessary for the Mirror to publish these pictures in a story about palace security?
Don't forget, we're a national newspaper, and we're there to sell newspapers. And you know, I mean, that's an obvious fact. So we can't escape the fact that people are interested in what the Queen has on their breakfast table.
And that's what the royal family are up against. Servants know what goes on behind closed doors.
The royal family don't expect you to go into the Queen's bedroom and photograph her bed, the most intimate part of her home. Absolutely disgusting.
While loyal servants and the Queen might be outraged, Ryan Parry has been rewarded.
I've made my mark as a journalist. You know, yesterday I won Scoop of the Year at the What the Papers Say Award, and now for a young journalist to win that is a great achievement, and I'm very proud of that.
The scandal surrounding Ryan Parry was enormous, and he was only in Buckingham Palace for 2 months. But when a servant who has been at the heart of the royal family for 21 years tells his story, then the world's media stops to listen.
I'm now here in America to tell my side of the story and the truth about the consequences of a case which never should have been brought in the first place.
Royal servants who get close to their masters get to know their secrets, and Paul Burrell knows more than most. He first served Lady Diana in weeks before her wedding in 1981. She had moved into Buckingham Palace, and Paul and a fellow footman went on a special errand for her.
Mark Simpson and Paul Burrell trot out of Buckingham Palace and go down one of the side roads to a McDonald's and bring back 3 Big Macs, some fries and some Coke. They sneak in, and it's almost like this Pink Panther-esque escapade, tiptoeing down the carpets, knowing they'll be in huge trouble if found. And they drop off this Big Mac, and they have this little Big Mac party. And that was the first time Paul saw how breathtakingly normal, down-to-earth and genuine the princess was, and how lost she was.
Footmen dining with royalty is against all the rules. Buckingham Palace operates to strict protocol, and the Queen insists that royal etiquette should never be broken.
There was one occasion when she was having this cocktail party, and the then butler said, "Tell Her Majesty, dinner's ready." I walked into the middle of the room, got the Queen's attention. I bowed my head, I said, "Oh, Your Majesty, your dinner's ready." And her face kind of dropped, just seconds. And I thought, oh, what have I just said? Now, I'd told her dinner was ready. No harm done, but it's not the done way. It's, "Your Majesty, dinner is served." So she was slightly irritated because she had all these people there, who, the ones in the immediate earshot, had heard me and probably thought, well, I've got better staff at home in Africa.
Even today, that protocol is still firmly. It even directs how footmen should walk down the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Journalist Ryan Parry was told that he should keep to what was called the slow lane.
Corridors are huge, you know, the vast, long corridors. And every morning, a team of maids hoover the deep pile carpet. It's kind of a hidden rule, if you like, that we have to walk along the perimeter of the carpet. Because obviously, if we walk straight down the middle, then we're going to mess up the lines that the maids have carefully put into the carpet.
But that kind of royal protocol didn't suit Diana. She crossed the invisible line that divided royalty from their servants.
Princess would just come down into the kitchen and just walk down the stairs and just say, "Hi, Darren." And, you know, that was just wonderful. You just sort of look, you know, shocked what you were doing, and stop what you were doing and just look up and, you know, Princess Diana was there.
But that didn't go down well with some of the more traditional staff.
Part of the old brigade just didn't think it was right that the royals came down to the kitchen. And then there were the others that were a little bit jealous that someone like Princess Diana would come down, and instead of going to the senior member of staff, she would look out for the friendly faces that she knew.
Jealousy and resentment are rife below stairs. Servants fight to get the top jobs that will get them closer to the royals because there are so few vacancies.
It's literally dead men's shoes. To actually become the Queen's butler or the Queen's senior footman or whatever, it's a rare position. Some of these men and women are there 50 years. So if you was to say in the staff dining room when you're having your own meal, "Oh, I'm getting fed up of working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. I haven't got time for a social life. I haven't been home to see my family in weeks." Somebody's earwigging on the next table, I think. So they run along to the master and say, "Excuse me, sir, I've heard that such a body is thinking of leaving, and could I apply should that position come available?"
But Paul Burrell didn't have to wait for a butler to die. As an ambitious young servant, he was given the chance of a lifetime. He was invited to be butler to the couple who would one day rule the country. It was a massive promotion. But as he helped the Queen and her lady-in-waiting into the car on his last day, he was leaving the woman he had come to idolise.
And he does what he always does. He places a rug over their knees. And he stands back, stiff-backed. But all the time in the back of his mind, he knows this is his final duty. And he's waiting for some recognition, a flicker of emotion, perhaps a farewell gesture. And he stands there, waiting and waiting, and the Queen's looking straight ahead. And that stiff upper lip doesn't quiver. And the car drove off. And that was it. That was it. Goodbye.
That's what older servants have come to expect from their royal masters.
It's no good whinging when they don't react in a way you feel they should react. They're royal. End of it. They always will be royal. So we will never be elevated to their status, and we servants must never expect them to come down to ours. She's friendly, but never your friend.
Paul Burrell was going to be butler to the Prince and Princess of Wales, and he was going to see the difference between their household and the Queen's.
Prince Charles is memo mad. With the Queen, instructions were verbally issued via the proper network. With Prince Charles, the big difference was that he went into this crazy system of memo writing, you know, to the point where there's something that's dropped in the bin and you want it to be retrieved, you know, ask the servant to pick it out of the bin. Prince Charles tended to write a letter saying, I think something's dropped in the bin, could you try and retrieve it for me?
Prince Charles also has a legendary temper, as his staff know to their cost. One of his later butlers was Ken Stronach, who sold stories to the press which revealed what his master was like to serve.
Charles and Ken Stronach were away for a weekend with friends, and staying at a friend's house. And Charles was trying to put his own collar studs in, which he doesn't normally do for his formal shirt. And he dropped one of the studs, and it sort of bounced around the sink and went down the plug hole. Charles was in a fury, just ripped the sink from the wall, threw it to the floor, shattered it into 1,000 pieces, retrieved the stud, and Ken had to put it in. And then when Ken had put it in, Charles grabbed him by the throat. Well, he said, you do understand, Ken, I just have to let this out. Well, Ken was so terrified, he sort of backed out of the room, but he didn't know the geography of the room, so he backed into a cupboard and stayed there for 10 minutes before letting himself out.
By the time Paul Burrell started his job as butler, Charles and Diana's marriage was already in trouble. Prince Charles expected his butler to keep visits to Camilla a secret from the princess.
Paul just turned around to him and said, well, are you expecting me to lie for you, Your Royal Highness? And Prince Charles said, well, yes. Yes, I am. And went into this histrionics about being the King of England, the future King of England, the Prince of Wales, and you will lie, stamping his feet, and then threw this book in Paul's direction.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
The marriage was over. Princess Diana would set up her own court in Kensington Palace, and Paul Burrell was told to go with her. In the competitive world of servants, it would have been seen as a demotion.
I bumped into him at a party, and the party was a scheduled party. It was a reception for staff and charity workers, which they did every Christmas. And there was Paul Burrell standing in the corner in one of the rooms of the state apartments at Kensington Palace, blubbing is the best way of putting it, with a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. And I said, what's the matter with you? And he said, well, I've been told I've got to move to Kensington Palace and work for the princess, and I don't want to. I don't want to work for the princess, and I don't want to move to Kensington Palace. I said to him, well, be thankful you've got a job to go to.
But this was Princess Diana's chance to throw out royal protocol and create the kind of court that suited her.
Diana was far freer. She was far more relaxed about the way she ran her court. She would go down and spend time with the chef, chat with the chauffeur, talk to her bodyguard. She was far more relaxed.
One day she would come in and she'd talk about something she'd just been chatting with the Queen about. She would walk in, burst through the doors and say, you'll never believe what Fergie's just told me. Or she would just come in and say, Darren, can you believe what's happening on Brookside?
But it wasn't all happy families. Diana's court still had the traditional palace rivalry between servants and senior staff.
The senior members of the royal household are people at the top end, such as private secretaries, the person that runs the official life of a member of the royal family.
And these senior staff have very different backgrounds from the other servants. Many of them come from the services.
I think if you have worked in a profession that has a hierarchical structure, then that helps. And certainly something like the Royal Navy has a very clear hierarchy, and having operated within that for more than a decade, I was quite at home working in a hierarchical organisation like the Royal Household. That means that you're used to taking orders, but more often giving orders too.
There's a snobbery among servants, there really is. The private secretary would think, well, he's a notch above a butler, you know, who's like a glorified waiter. And then we have to kind of remind him that he's just a pencil pusher and that I don't plan on bringing a cup of tea to their office. Get off your butt and brew up yourself.
But in Diana's court, the pecking order wasn't based on a traditional hierarchy. Hers was an emotional court. and seniority was based on how well you got on with her, and the person who did that best was Paul Burrell.
He was a clever and manipulative servant who won Diana's favour by, for want of a better word, probably being the best sycophant in the whole household.
How would he do that?
Ma'am, you look so gorgeous today. That dress is so beautiful. Oh, you're looking wonderful in those shoes. Isn't it the most beautiful outfit you've worn? I don't think I've ever seen you looking so glamorous. Flattery.
As Paul Burrell got closer and closer to Diana, Patrick Jephson, who was actually more senior to Paul, found his job almost impossible to do.
And imagine being Patrick Jephson. You have been the organiser, the efficient organiser, to perfect detail of the princess's world. And then all of a sudden you find yourself frozen out. You find your word being questioned because the princess is showing letters or asking advice to Paul Burrell. Imagine being Patrick Jephson for a minute and thinking, I'm being usurped. I'm being questioned by a effing butler.
But just like the other members of the royal family, Diana insisted on absolute loyalty. Woe betide them if they displeased her.
She would withhold eye contact from somebody who had displeased her, and perhaps lavish it on somebody who hadn't done anything particularly commendable.
Diana's chef found himself cold-shouldered for 3 whole days.
It was resolved, I think, one night I sent dinner in and I actually made a smiley face with the stuffed eggplant and the red pepper and sort of did a plate with a smiley face, and I think the princess saw the funny side and it was sort of, things were back on track again.
By 1996, Patrick Jephson was out and Diana had become even more reliant on Paul Burrell.
She'd be going back to an empty house and being quite lonely. She was alone with her thoughts, she was alone with her writing, her telephone calls, a lot of the time alone with the butler. And if there is nobody else to talk to, I mean, some people have dogs, have pets, and they talk to their pets. She talked to her pet.
She should have never allowed him into her royal domain. The Queen is also lonely and on her own, and just sat down watching a little TV. But she wouldn't dream of saying to me or to somebody else, pull a chair up, pour a cup of tea, let's have a natter.
Even those who served alongside Paul in Kensington Palace felt that he overstepped the position of trust he was placed in. Chef Darragh McGrady would find him reading her letters.
On several occasions, I would just shout, "Oi!" and he would sort of jump. I'd catch him unaware, and he would just sort of look up and smile and just carry on.
But there were reports that the princess caught Paul Burrell rifling through her papers and was furious.
He went straight to the Princess of Wales, apologised to her, begged her not to sack him, and then fell at her feet and quite literally grovelled at her feet like a whipped dog. It was quite the most shameful thing for anyone to witness. But it worked. She must have liked his level of grovelling because he got to keep his job.
The story that Paul grovelled at the princess's feet is utter nonsense. Seen by whom and when? You know, it's suggested that Paul was seen rifling through the princess's correspondence. Why would he need to rifle through her correspondence when she's willingly showing him? One of the final letters she wrote to Paul was, "We look forward to happier homes and a brighter future. And, you know, thank you for your tower of strength," etc., etc. She was taking Paul Burrell with her into the next phase of her life. She was taking him to California, and she'd probably live there 6 months there, 6 months in Britain.
But whatever her plans, they came to nothing. Because on the 31st of August 1997, Princess Diana died in a Paris underpass.
The night her body was lying in state at Kensington Palace, Paul was sitting beside her, holding her hand, running some jewellery of hers through his fingers, running some pearls of hers through his fingers, which was a pretty odd thing to do.
As with all servants on the death of their master, Paul Burrell was out of a job, and ex-servants are expected to exit gracefully.
Professional butlers, there aren't many in the world. The Americans pay thousands of dollars a month to just get an English butler. Double that to get an English butler who can lay claim to having served the royal family. Plus, we become a conversation piece for Arnie Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, to say to Bruce Lee on the phone, Bruce Willis, oh, my butler knows the royal family, you know. And for that symbol status in Hollywood, they pay a fortune.
The money might have been good in Hollywood, and Mel Gibson had already offered him a job. But Paul Burrell began to be famous in his own right, as the dutiful ex-servant, of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Princess of Wales was a genuine, giving person.
And then it all went horribly wrong. In a blaze of media speculation, Paul Burrell was arrested. He was charged with stealing nearly 300 items from Princess Diana and her sons.
He made it clear from the outset there were certain matters being kept for safekeeping because he had seen the Spencers shredding documents and other material, and he felt that history in the princess's world should not be put through a shredder.
Whether or not the Spencers were shredding documents, Darren McGrady was at Kensington Palace in the days after Diana's death, and he has a very different recollection of what Paul Burrell was doing with her belongings.
After the princess's death, Paul did offer me something belonging to the princess, but I did decline. I said, no, it's not right. I don't want to take it, thank you.
How did that happen? We were sitting together.
Yes, we were sitting together in the butler's pantry, and it wasn't right. I felt uneasy because it was wrong.
On the 9th day of the trial, the case against him collapsed.
Paul Burrell, the former butler of Princess Diana, sensationally walked free from court today after an unprecedented intervention from the Queen.
How does it feel?
How do you feel?
Very happy, thank you. Where's the taxi?
Is this what you expected?
Of course it is.
All of 5 days to break the silence of the dutiful servant. He made a reputed £300,000 from the Mirror, and a year later he published the book he'd sworn never to write.
Paul and I made a pact that we would never ever talk about the princess's private life. I'll never talk about what the princess did and said. You know, smuggling the princess out in a car. Paul says he did that in his book. Well, I took the princess out in my car, covered in a blanket. I would never, ever say where I took her, or where we were going, when.
I think Paul Burrell wrote the book to make money. He had a lot of money to pay out after his legal problems at the court, and he had to make some money, but also because he was very, very bitter about the whole experience.
I was wrongly accused of stealing items belonging to the Princess of Wales. My name was cleared, bringing to an end 21 months of hell.
No servant should write their revelationary book because it's just an act of disloyalty. It's an act of, well, traitorism.
Telling my story was never about money.
I would welcome back Henry VIII. He had a wonderful, unique way of shutting people's mouths.
It was only ever about the truth.
Once your head's chopped off, you can't say a word, can you?
I'm now here in America to tell my side of the story.
We were put in a wonderful position where we can go out and spread the word about Princess Diana, about the good that she did, the good stories that she did. You know, how she did go out in the darkness of night, putting things into rubbish bins for for the homeless to find, putting coats and things out there.
Whether Paul Burrell had revealed the princess's secrets or not, there were events in his own past that he wanted to keep from the press.
He does have a past which he has tried to hide and has denied. The Sun reported on a gay love affair he had about 15, 20 years ago with an Australian tourist by the name of Greg Peed. We went over to Sydney to interview Greg, and he showed us all the correspondence he had with Paul, how he stayed with him at Buckingham Palace. Now, when these allegations were put to Paul Burrell, he denied them. So that shows that he's willing to lie.
Can we trust his word about Diana's private life if he's willing to lie about his own?
He's a happily married man. I think he answers his own question. He's a happily married man. I'm not here to discuss his private life.
I don't really want to go into great detail about
And
that.
the Sun came up with the story, didn't they? You know, Paul Burrell has a gay lover and he denies it.
Yes, I read stories about him.
Did you hear stories?
Yes, I heard stories. Yes, but I don't want to go into great detail with it.
And did he ever proposition you?
Yes, he did.
Gay servants aren't unusual. In fact, they're a traditional part of palace life.
There is a lot of gay staff. The work at Buckingham Palace and in the royal households anyway is such that meticulous care has to be given to the preparation of things. They're looking after a gentleman's wardrobe, his clothes, making sure he's dressed correctly and well presented. All this is a certain type of flair, and many gay men have this flair, perhaps better than butch, heterosexual men. Plus, they're not going to marry. They're not going to have children. So they can give their whole lives to this family. And this is the kind of language the Queen understands.
Gay servants are one thing, a gay prince is quite another. And when a servant makes that kind of allegation, it becomes a national scandal.